Animator. I'm in Brisbane and he's in Sydney. It'd be nice to understand the behind the scenes and mindset and the hard work that people go to make interesting animations that entertain us.
So Nick, you're a self-taught animator, is that right?
I've basically dabbled in animation since, I don't know, since I was 25. I'm pretty old now, so it's been a long time. It's been a decade and a half, let's just say.
So how did you get started into it?
I grew up watching tons of animation. I mean, look, if you're an Asian man growing up in the 80s and 90s, there was just anime everywhere. Not as easy to get access to when you're in Australia, but you knew about Astro Boy and all that kind of stuff. And you know, you love Disney, but there was something about like Japanese animation that was like really fascinating. And I kind of fell in love with the whole genre of animation as a little kid. I think naturally I wanted to know how that stuff was all put together. Back then, it was really hard to find information about how this stuff was getting made. Now everybody's making a behind the scenes of everything that they create. When you're a kid in the 80s, you're trying to find out anything that gives you information on how to do animation. It was hard finding it, but eventually you figured out, oh, right, they do one drawing at a time. They have this little table where they put a light underneath and they can actually see through the paper, so you can actually see the drawings behind and after it as well. It just looks so crazy that people used to do it that way. Obviously, people don't do that now, but that to me was just so fascinating that you can just take drawings and turn them into something that comes alive. And I think that to me is the great draw card of animation for me, is just taking something that is essentially dead and bringing it to life.
Are you right there?
Huh?
You can't help yourself, can you?
Oh, I thought it was someone I knew.
So did you start with doing a few sketches and maybe stop motion? You know how people start drawing on the pages and then they flip it? Did you do that?
Yeah, definitely. I think any animator would probably attest to the fact that they probably drew in the margins of their textbooks at school while they were sitting at the back of their class. I remember there are so many textbooks I had where I was drawing the end of Return of the Jedi, where they're flying through the trench run and into the Death Star. And I remember drawing that sequence a few times. It took me a whole term to basically get it drawn, but I loved it. It was just something, and every animator loves doing that kind of stuff.
I bet you can't go 10 seconds without turning around to look at the next girl that walks past.
Okay, watch me.
So when did you start learning a software that made your drawing into a digital format?
It wasn't until I got to working at Hillsong, basically, where I started learning. I got my hands on After Effects, which was kind of the first animation program that I got to use. Actually, even before that, I used to do really crude stuff in using Photoshop, drawing out the characters in Photoshop, and then just sort of breaking up the parts in Photoshop, like the arms and legs, and trying to animate them in another program, which was called Vegas, which was a Sony program.
Oh,
yeah, which is a really, really old program, like for people who know that stuff. Anyway, and then when I got to After Effects, it was like another level altogether, where I was like, oh, I have so much more control over my keyframes and the way the characters act. And more so than that, there was a community of people who were really into animation in After Effects, like character animation in After Effects. And so it was just kind of cool, like finding new ways to kind of do all this stuff.
You can't help yourself, can you? I bet you can't go 10 seconds without turning around to look at the next girl. I bet you can't go 10 seconds without turning around to look at the next girl. I bet you can't go 10 seconds without turning around to look at the next girl. I bet you can't go 10 seconds without turning around to look at the next girl.
And so you went from Sketch to Photoshop, then into After Effects. That's what makes it become 3D.
After Effects is not really a 3D program. It's more of a 2.5D is what they usually call it. After Effects is a motion graphics and compositing program. So when you want to get things to move around with a bit of polish, usually you move to After Effects to get those extra things. It's a really hard thing to explain to people, like, why do you use After Effects over Premiere? There's definitely overlap. I definitely have to say there's tons of overlap, but After a while, you start to realize what Premiere is good for and what After Effects is good for. But there's a lot of times where I just spend a lot more time in Premiere first, and then I'll go to After Effects when I'll do everything I can in Premiere because that's a much faster program. And then I'll go to After Effects when I get to the point where I can't do any more in Premiere, or it just becomes harder to do it in Premiere. And doing tutorials online, and a lot of other people were very hesitant to want to give out that information. Thankfully, there was this one guy called Andrew Kramer who basically blew the lid off After Effects tutorial training and basically opened it up for all of us. And made it so much more accessible to help us understand how this program works. And after that, it was so much easier. But before then, it was really, really hard to actually come across not only just what the buttons were, but what they was, how to use them in the most efficient manner. And that's the problem, is that you can jump into After Effects and can do so many things, but it's it's so overwhelming because it can do so many things. So you don't really know where to start when you get into there. Once you figure out the quirkiness, and it's a quirky program.
It's a quirky program.
So there are other programs on the market that are similar in this regard. So After Effects is sort of a hybrid of a few different things. It's not purely a compositing program like Nuke, or for example, and it's not purely like an animation program. It's sort of a mix of a few different things. So in a lot of ways, it's been cobbled together into this sort of one-stop shop kind of package, which makes it immensely powerful and really confusing at the same time. So
so I guess it takes longer than an editing software, but you'd have to have editing skills first to understand how to then go into that mindset of how to operate that software, would you say?
Well, that's a good question, actually. I actually don't know, because I obviously came from an editing background, so I don't know what it's like to come from a non-editing background into After Effects. I have met editors who started in After Effects first, and they actually prefer editing in After Effects, which I find really odd because I actually don't. I think it's the worst program for editing. But in terms of speed, anyway, you can do it, but it's in terms of just pure speed, I would never use After Effects for editing. Yeah, but definitely, I don't know. I would love to meet somebody to see what they thought of Premiere after working in After Effects first.
Oh, interesting. I actually think it's really educational what we're talking about.
Finish him.
Do you think people need to upgrade their computer if they want to start editing? I personally sometimes don't know if that's necessary.
No, you don't need the best computer. You just need our computer. I mean, look, the reality is if you've got a computer that meets the minimum requirements, obviously more CPU power is going to give you a bit more flexibility in what you can do, but ultimately you can edit on your phone. Let's be honest. Okay. You might not have all the features you want, but you can definitely get started. And I mean, if you look at kind of TikTok that's happening at the moment, I mean, everybody just does that stuff on their phone.
Yeah,
and
true.
Some of that stuff is it's just cuts, really. If you want to get started, there's no barrier to entry to get started out on editing. That's the great, amazing thing about where we are at the moment in history, is that if you want to make something, you can totally do it. The cost barrier to entry is so low. You can start today.
Have you been up here?
Oh, actually, I think I have a long time ago.
Brisbane's got beautiful weather today. What do you recommend for people who want to learn how to tell a short story that already have, software on their phone? What's a great tip you can give to people to learn how to make a story come together?
This is the thing with writing a story, especially with a short film. It's basically a joke. You got to start, it's a setup, there's a misdirection, and then there's the punchline. So that's essentially a very basic way to set up a short. A classic example, if you can go back and watch the archives of Vines when that was around, in 6 seconds, those guys can convey so much information in 6 seconds. That is the formula for how to make a short film. The setup, the misdirection and then the punchline, what a short film or short story should be. You can make 20-second short films. Like there's one guy I actually find really fascinating. There's a guy on YouTube called ProZD. He makes 20-second videos on YouTube, millions of views per video.
Yeah.
And they're so good. They're just they're just ridiculous but really, really funny short videos that are just really fascinating to watch. It just fascinates me all the time that this guy can cram so much information in 20 seconds.
So you've got a short animation about milk.
A long time ago. Actually, this was on the back of the previous film that I did, which was an animated short called Don't Look. And that last animation I did was like a little bit of 3D with After Effects, a little bit of 2D After Effects. And so this time I really wanted to go for a hand-drawn kind of look. But the funny thing was when I started doing that short 7 years ago, I was not a very good drawer. I could draw a little bit. I didn't actually know how to do animation that was like hand-drawn animation, like frame-to-frame animation. I actually was very unfamiliar with doing it that way. Like I'd done a lot of read characters. Like my characters would just move according to how, like kind of like
how the
3D
software,
animation.
how the formula went. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I wanted to try something a little bit different. And so it took me 7 years to figure out how to get this short done, and I finally released it. That was basically the impetus of why I started doing it. I just remember thinking like, oh, it'd be kind of fun to do a story in a zombie apocalypse. Just a basic idea that he runs out of milk and he needs to go get some more milk, and so he has to fight off all the zombies to get some more milk, basically. Just thought it was a really funny concept to try and animate.
It's very relevant, except you didn't use toilet paper. Yeah, like going to the supermarket and all the zombies are trying to fight for the last toilet roll.
It's very coincidental that it kind of runs into the themes of what's happening in 2020. The only reason I was able to finish it is because we've got a little bit of extra time at home now. So I have to actually say that a lot of the reason why I was able to get it finished this time round was because using the app Procreate on the iPad Pro, you can actually animate stuff frame by frame, and it's so easy to do. It's so easy to do.
So I guess you have this passion and this motivation and drive to conquer the next challenge.
I kind of realize now talking to you, a lot of the reason I do a lot of the things that I do is because I write a story around something I can't do. Funny, that's my philosophy, is that I'll be like, I've actually never done this before. I'm going to write a story so that I can do specifically this thing that I don't know how to do.
Well, hope you have a lovely rest of the afternoon.
Bye.